My name is Jyotirmay Chena. I'm a conservation biologist, and I have been working in the Central Indian landscape almost for a decade. I started my career as a young researcher with Wildlife Institute of India. Then I was working with WWF India as a landscape coordinator. I was mostly working in the corridors and on large carnivore, particularly tigers. Also, I was looking after strategies to mitigate human-wildlife conflict in these areas. Right now, I have taken a small break from my conservation career, and right now I am based at Patna in Bihar. At the same time, me and some like-minded friends of mine were working on coming up with some kind of startups which seems to which actually it's on a development stage, and we're thinking to come up with a startup which is related to conservation. What we'll do is we'll operate as an intermediate between the technological people or the innovators, and between the conservation management people or managing. So our focus will be how new technologies can be used to improve the conservation management. It's uh, it's because how I grew up. I grew up in a very small village in Odisha, and so my entire childhood has been with interacting with nature, and I during my early childhood I got an exposure to visit one of the tiger reserve, earliest tiger reserve, Simlipal Tiger Reserve in Odisha. So me and my cousin brother used to visit the forest areas, and that's how my curiosity to the forest and wildlife, as well as the tribals who are living in the forest, grew up. And I was mesmerized by the simplicity and beauty of nature. So since then, I was very much interested toward nature, but I didn't know that conservation can be a career until unless one of my zoology professors suggested me that there is a course in conservation and you can do it as a career. So that's how my conservation career started. Yeah, so basically, conservation science is mostly dealt with biological science, So one should have a biological background at least to be into this profession. Uh, then once you have a biological background after your bachelor's degree, then you can choose for master's degree either in ecology or in conservation biology or any other biological related field, though which can be utilized in conservation. This is how you get your academic degree. So once you have a degree, then you need to understand which aspect you want to go. I mean, whether you want to be a field biologist, whether you want to be a hardcore field researcher, or want to be an academician, so there are a lot of opportunities. If you do your career in the academic front, then you carry on your research, do your PhD, maybe postdoc, then you join as a scientist or as a professor in any of the universities who have conservation biology department. So that's a one aspect. Then another aspect is conservation biologist. Conservation biologists, they do not deal with the only hardcore science part. You have to be little bit of versatile. In the sense you must have idea not only on wildlife but also on the other branches related to conservation. For an example, one should have an understanding on the social science part also. Because people and conservation, they are not separate. You cannot separate them very differently, because in multiple way, human as well as wildlife, they interact with each other. So if you want to be a conservationist, then it's not only science, you have to look into other parts also. So I would say there are a lot of schools. It's really depend upon any individual which part he want to explore or continue. Okay, let me tell you, Care India Access doesn't work on biodiversity or wildlife conservation. They basically work on public health. I think they have certain projects on climate change adaptation also, but they are focused on other they are focused on other issues of the human society or development sector. WWF India, yes, it's one of the oldest and biggest organizations working in our country, and they have lot of different programs and spanned over different geographical region in the country. So there they have whole where believe that human and wildlife can coexist simultaneously. They believe in keeping the harmony between human as well as wildlife. WWF India has been working since a long time in conservation in India, and they have a lot of different programs. It's very difficult to jot down all the programs because they work on multiple species, multiple aspects of conservation. So yes, they have a lot of different. See, basically, these organizations not only run conservation programs, but they also work on policy level. They work with government. They try to build linkages between community, government, as in any developmental non-governmental organization. They have a multiple goals. So beside running their own program and contributing to conservation of the species, they also help the government. At the same time, they also help the community or the local people who are residing around the forest. So they bridge the gap between government as well as community, and also they safeguard the species of whichever is of interest. See, I mean, we oftenly uh, use the word human-animal conflict, but nowadays people are trying to use a different word that is more justified. That is called human-wildlife interaction, because conflict itself has a, I mean, it has got a, yeah. So yes, there has been a lot of incident where I have witnessed such kind of human interaction. While I was working in Central India, we were actually trying to mitigate those kind of interaction. The kind of interaction in Central India we were working was cattle depredation by large carnivores, mostly by tigers and leopards. So every day we used to get we used to record around 10 to 20 such cattle depredation incidents in certain particular area, Kana Plains corridor. That's around maybe around 100-kilometer long area. So every day we used to get at least 10 such incidents where cattle were killed by either tiger or and me and my team used to put camera traps on those kills so that we can identify which animal actually killed that livestock. Then we also used to pay some ex gratia amount so that the person who lost his cattle do not get uh, do not build a negative attitude towards the wildlife or large carnivores. Because often we have seen that people used to put poison on those livestock kill, and as a result of this, either tiger or leopard or any carnivore hits the carcass, they die. So our objective was to minimize such negative attitude of people, and putting a camera actually helped us not to understand how these large carnivores are moving inside. And an interesting thing I would share, we found a photograph of a tiger we shared with Madhya Pradesh as well as Maharashtra. Actually, we shared with Madhya Pradesh Forest Department, and Madhya Pradesh Forest Department, one officer from Madhya Pradesh Forest Department, he informed us that this tiger is from Nabhegaon Naxira Tiger Reserve, where it was recorded as a cow. So, if you are familiar with geographical area of those areas, I mean, Nabhegaon Naxira is in Maharashtra. It's close to Gondia district of Maharashtra, whereas we photographed in Siuni district of Madhya Pradesh. So that shows how the tiger has moved from Maharashtra all the way up to Madhya Pradesh. That also vouch for the functionalities of. I mean, people always think about tiger reserves, but these are areas which are outside of any kind of tiger reserve. These are normal territories. That was quite interesting. Yeah, I mean, that's how the All India Tiger Estimation is done, right? So you must have heard about All India Tiger Estimation, which is done by the government as well as Wildlife Ministry of India, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Government, Wildlife Ministry of India. So every 4 years they do a national level census for tiger population, and there are several methodologies involved in it. They have got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, different strategies in different phases to estimate the population. In phase 1, they do map out the presence absence of large carnivores. This is done by the forest department, of state forest department in each state. In the phase 2, they map out all these information into a GIS domain, and they see where this tiger presence has been found. They calculate the occupancy of tigers and other animals for the entire country level. Then on the third phase, they do intensive sampling, and whereas tiger reserve they do each year camera trapping. So this is how. So that's a statistically rigorous process where they estimate the tiger population for the country. So recently they published the last year result, 2018 result was no, yeah, 2000. Just last month they published the latest census result. It's a mixed method. They it's a mix. There is a lot of methods involved in estimating the population. They do sign survey, then they do camera trapping, and once they get individual tiger picture, they try to identify individual tigers, and once tiger individuals are identified, they run through a statistical modeling called Markov-Chain, through which it gives you a density. Yeah, unique species. I mean, every species is unique in its sense, but certain species which are hard to see, and maybe there are certain species which one person love to see, right? Everybody loves to see tiger or leopard, large species, but being into I mean, being a conservation, biologist, we used to see a lot of tigers and leopards and all these things. So my fascination was to see certain species which I never got a chance to see. So I recall an incident when I was in Corbett Tiger Reserve. I was working with wildlife district. So for the first time, I saw yellow-throated marten. So it's a very small creature, looks like a mongoose. It's dark, uh, it's black in color, but on the neck region it has got yellow color hair. So that species I always had only seen it on the picture. When we used to read about distribution of mammals in India, we used to see, okay, this is yellow-throated marten. I never had a sighting of yellow-throated marten. So while I was walking in Corbett, once I saw it. So that was quite interesting. See, publications are very important part of conservation science, because uh, whatever we do in the field, whatever knowledge we get through our work in the field, and also we collect a lot of data, it has to be published, so that it has to be published in such a way that the findings of our work or our experiences can be helpful in management and decision for the conservation. So it is very necessary we publish our understandings and findings. Yes, also being, if you are into science, then you have to publish papers. So that also gives you a academic credibility. So I have a couple of papers written over my. Then I had while I was working with WWF, we actually published quite a few reports, which are very important because first of all they are close to my heart, because me and my team worked on these reports. The data actually comes from our field. And the second thing is these reports were the very first reports from those areas, right? And these are the first-hand information you can get. So somebody wants to understand those areas, this report will help you to have a kind of first-hand knowledge on these areas. So yes, we have published a couple of reports, and these reports has been well appreciated by forest department because these reports have helped them take a lot of management decisions. And I would say our Kanha Pinch work actually was the pioneer publication which generated a lot of response and attention from conservation community towards this topic. And yes, there are a lot of other people who has done a lot of very good research in this areas. So yes, besides we sometime I have looked at a couple of popular articles like Century Magazine or somewhere else. So that also attracts a different kind of audience, and sometimes we need to pass a message. So people should learn about the area or something. They should have a message, then we pass the popular idea. Besides, publication also helps us in policy development. Suppose, I mean, I'll give you an example. I will not quote the name, but I'll give you an example. Suppose a certain area has a suppose a forest area supports a critical or endangered species. Now there comes a mining industry. Now government wants to give them a permission for doing the mining. But if you will go to government and tell them, no, this area has got a critical species, you cannot do mining. It's very difficult for them to understand. So once you go with a published report, you see we have done a work and this thing has been published. This can actually change the policy level decision. Publications are important, and I've tried my best to publish a couple of papers and reports. I mean, that would be too harsh word to say business agenda, but it's like, see, they cannot do anything because in our education culture or system, publication makes a lot of difference. So if you go for a lectureship or if you go for a sign, if you apply for a position, then your publications, number of publications needs you mark, achieve mark. So now, and a lot of credibility is given to people who has published a lot. That pushes the researcher to publish the paper instead of looking into what management, or instead of thinking into what management implication or management drugs can be derived out of it. So it's a kind of system-driven problem, I would say. Nothing else. But still, there are a lot of good papers are written every year. There are still a lot of good reports are being published, and it helps the managers. These corridors are always there. It has been there since a long time. I mean, so we are not trying to build a corridor, rather we are trying to safeguard the corridor. Whatever it is, I mean, if it is functional, then it should be remain functional. Otherwise, tiger cannot be protected in isolation because it's a it's a large species, and it requires a lot of area. And if tigers are kept or only conserved in genetic isolation, then you will have the population crash. So tigers have to move from one area to another so that the genetic diversity can be maintained. So corridors are not only tigers, I mean for every wildlife species. It's very important that the genetic mixture happens, and these animals move from one place to another. So that is why these corridors are essential. These corridors have been there since so many years. The only problem has come up because of the change in land use pattern recently. The developmental pressure has come. The mining, the roads, they are jeopardizing the this connectivity or the corridors or the linkages. So as a result of which, now animals cannot move from one place to another. So what usually conservationists do, or any organization do, is they try to assess whether these forests are working as in working or facilitating the movement of animals or not, whether they are helping in maintaining the genetic flow or not, and how these, if they are helping or acting as a corridor, these forests, then how they should be preserved. Now, every corridor has got certain degrees of they actually face multiple threats, but certain threats are very common to certain geographical region. Like in central India, the corridors are they have mining problems in most of the corridors. Okay, then there is fragmentation, there is loss of forest, then there is land use change. So all these kinds of threats are very common to all the corridors. So these people, what they do is, there is a lot of approaches to address those issues. While we are talking about wildlife, we should not forget that these corridors are also home to the communities living around. So there has to be a balance in between these two, right? So the organization or the conservationists, they try to develop or build their understanding on these multiple aspects, so that they can recommend or devise or suggest a strategy how to mitigate the threats while balancing the both the side, whether it is wildlife as well as humans. Okay. So there are a lot of strategies. So for an example, some places where the connectivity is lost, then they recommend restoration. Suppose there is a part, the corridors are quite spread over quite a long area, and suppose there is an area where forest connectivity is lost, so animal cannot move from point A to point B. So they need to restore the area in between, the blank space, through restoration activities. So this is a initiative. Then there are a lot of other activities that are done. Like the people who are residing in forest, they depend on the forest also. So they depend on forest for their livelihood, their fuelhood, all kind of things, because they don't have any other alternative livelihood also. So depending on forest also put certain amount of pressure on the forest. So that is why there is a lot of livelihood generation activities. There are a lot of other ways to provide them livelihood options through partnering with government schemes and other things, so that the dependency can be reduced. So there are multiple strategies are adopted based on the locality and the kind of problem for any particular region. Yeah. Otherwise, it will be difficult to survive. Being a responsible individual to the nature. So what I mean by being responsible to nature is the best way you can contribute to conservation is reduce your carbon footprint. When we are, suppose I'm maybe a doctor, I don't have anything to deal with conservation, but you ask me how do I contribute to conservation, then he doesn't have to come to a tiger reserve or go to a forest to contribute to conservation. Just simply reduce your carbon, reuse, recycle things, do not use lots of plastic, do not waste water, do not waste electricity. These simple things actually contributes to the conservation, because everything we use in our life is some way directly or indirectly related to natural resources. So yeah, every action in some way or other way related to natural resources. So judicial use of things, be responsible to nature, I would say, as to be done by.